Time now for Fantasy Forecast Central Radio. Here's Nick Slegel and Brian Dezelske.
Welcome to another edition of Fantasy Forecast Central Radio. My name is Nick Slegel, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Brian Dezelske. Brian, how's it going, buddy?
It's going really well, Nick. Got 2 weeks in the books here of preseason football. That means about 2 weeks left before the start of the regular season. And I'm getting excited, man. I'm getting pumped. Fantasy drafts are starting to take place. Have you had any drafts take place yourself? Any big money drafts?
Yeah, I just did my quote-unquote home league that I had to drive 4 hours to get to. We had our draft this weekend. It's a lot of fun. I guess you could call it a big money league. We have a decent-sized pay-in, but that was a lot of fun to sit around, with a bunch of people and actually do a draft because, most of us dynasty players have been drafting since like May, but you don't really do a dynasty draft in person so much. So it was cool to get out there and hang out with some friends. And get that started. And now this is sort of where all of my drafts are going to take place, like in the next week. So I'm just gearing up. How about you?
I haven't yet have been in a draft yet. I'm getting antsy, to be honest with you. I got 2 coming up next week, and then I take that back. I got 4 coming up next week, and then another one will be on Tuesday, before the season starts. That'll be my last one. So I'm getting geared up. I got all my strategies down as far as where I'm going to be drafting, in the first round, and so I just want to put it to use here. I'm getting anxious, to say the least.
I feel you. It's kind of fitting that we're talking. It's draft time. We're talking about that because we have 3 great guests coming on today. We're going to talk draft strategy. With all of them. So we got a lot of different areas to cover today. I'm pretty excited. But first let's kick it off with the news a little bit. Another week of preseason in the books, like you said. Another week of just more devastating injuries. We've talked about this a little before. I've talked about it on other shows. Everyone's talking about it. I really feel like this is the preseason of the injuries. And it sounds callous and cold to say it's to look at it from a fantasy perspective, but that's what we do, and it is directly affecting the fantasy world in a big way. And it's, we can never forget that these are real humans that are still getting injured. And as long as you keep that in mind, it's okay to talk about it from a fantasy perspective. I don't know if you caught the game or at least saw like a picture of it, but did you see Bakari Rambo or DJ Swearinger, take down Dustin Keller over the weekend, that horrific knee injury he suffered?
Yeah, I saw the play. I saw it happen, and I cringed just like everybody else did as soon as it happened, because you show the replay and you can see the knee go one way and the leg go the other. It's what is that, number 10, number 12, number 50 as far as torn ACLs, and he didn't even just blow an ACL. He blew an ACL, he blew a PCL, he blew an MCL, and he dislocated his kneecap. His entire knee just blew up, basically. I don't know if he's going to be ready next year at all. That might be a longer injury recovery time than we see from a normal ACL. Like you look at Adrian Peterson and Robert Griffin III. They're coming back. After ACL injuries that were at the end of the previous year. This happened at the beginning of a year, and he may not come back until midway through next season. So, it was a devastating injury. Fantasy-wise, I think if there are guys out there that were, targeting, in the late rounds, someone like Ryan Tannehill, as a QB2, something like that. I think losing Dustin Keller, puts a big crimp into their plans as to wanting to draft him. I think he was going to be the one person on that team from a receiving standpoint that was gonna elevate his value, to a QB2 or maybe even real fringe low end QB1 maybe. They do have Mike Wallace there, so that does make him even more intriguing. But I think the loss of Keller kind of puts the lid on Tannehill as a possible QB2. What are your thoughts?
I was high on Keller in that system. I thought it was going to do wonders for Tannehill, but then I saw an interesting statistic that last year under Joe Philbin, Ryan Tannehill targeted tight ends less than 7 times per game, the lowest in the league among starting quarterbacks. So I'm starting to think now, looking at the bigger picture, that maybe it won't have such a huge impact that we think it will. But you have to believe bringing in a Pro Bowl caliber tight end to an offense that's trying to get their passing game going is going to hurt at least a little bit. I still think it's, Tannehill's still capped at QB2 option. If you're in a 12-team or less league and you're relying on him as your QB1, hopefully you're really good at streaming.
Yeah, absolutely. But I feel like I'm gonna be looking in another direction when I'm drafting a QB2. I guess you're a bit higher on him, and you're right. You pointed out stat there about him and targeting tight ends that I was not aware of, but I think being Dustin Keller's caliber of a tight end, I think that would have went up this year quite a bit. I think last year they struggled at the tight end position to begin with, so I think that may have had something to do with that. So, let's turn our attention to Arian Foster. What are your thoughts on Arian Foster, and what as far as Ben Tate's ADP skyrocketing currently? Are you jumping on the Ben Tate bandwagon or what?
No, I mean, I get it. I get why his value is going up, and he's a good grab at the right place. I'm not targeting him. I'm not going out of my way to try to get him. Really, all this does for me, the sore back and the leg problems in the preseason, no less. It just makes me steer clear of Foster worse. And I get it. You can make the argument all day that he's been, top 10, top 5 every year. I get it. I look at those numbers and I see it. It's just I'm so scared of grabbing the running back in the first round that is the year that he doesn't do well or declines. I can't waste a top 5 pick on someone that I'm not 100% sure is going to produce for me this season. So for me, this just makes me steer clear of him more. It's probably part of my irrational fear of him. I'm not sure, but it's just cemented the fact that will draft anyone but Arian Foster in the first round, basically.
So you're anti-Foster completely.
I have been. This doesn't really change it all this much, so much as solidify it.
See, I think this is more, and this is my personal opinion, but I think this is more nagging injuries than like serious, like something that could be potentially serious down the road. I think once the season rolls around, I think you're going to see Foster kick it into gear, and I think you're going to see maybe not, I know he's been viewed as the number 2 running back, in most people's ranks, and I think over the course of the last week or so, a couple, there's some guys out there that have had other running backs leapfrog Foster, but I still think you're going to see a top 5 running back when the season's over, fantasy wise, from Arian Foster. You're going to see that type of season. I'm not completely worried. If I'm drafting number 5 overall in any league, 10 team, 12 team, you name it, if Foster's there at number 5, it's a no brainer. I take the card and I run that to the podium as fast as I possibly can. I have no issues with Arian Foster this year. I think he's going to put up another, double-digit plus, 15, touchdown type season, and he's going to have well over, 1,300 yards rushing, 1,400 yards rushing. That's just my personal opinion. I know other people, their views have changed since, these injuries, seem to be, lingering on, if you will. But I personally, I don't see that as any issue with when it comes to Arian Foster this year.
Yeah, I guess I see where you're coming from. With me, again, I said it, it's just that irrational fear type thing. But we're going to take a quick break right now, and when we come back, we will be on with T from Fantasy Trader 411. And welcome back to Fantasy Forecast Central Radio. We are joined now by T from Perusing the Perimeter and Fantasy Trader 411. T, how's it going, man?
Oh, it's going all right, man. Just enjoying this nice weather we're having in Cincinnati. I'm thankful that you guys decided to have me on today.
Oh yeah, dude, our pleasure. So something you started talking about, at least I noticed, maybe about 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago, and then talked about on your show last week, is sort of a different strategy for drafting. A lot of us subscribe to like late round QB or running back first, but you're sort of trying out a wide receiver first method. Can you explain it a little to us, like what your thinking is there and how it's working out for you?
My whole thought process behind it is just that, that's really what it is, within the industry right now. Everyone's, preaching, to go running back early and often. And, I started to think about, how can you gain an advantage, with all of that going on and, having, relatively low draft position in a snake draft, you're not really given, a fair shake when you have to succumb to that strategy. So I was just thinking of something outside of the box where I can sort of gain an advantage, but going into the research, there's not really that much of a difference. If anything, the whole wide receiver strategy actually works to the wide receiver's advantage. But, there are specific rules that you have to follow in order to follow the strategy to a T. And I think that, from what I found out, 10-team, 12-team leagues, in standard or PPR, that the draft strategy can be effective, in building a pretty solid roster going forward in your 2013 season.
Okay. So, how long have you been working on this? Like, how long is it taking you to sort of work out the kinks and figure out how it works correctly?
Well, as a guy that does two sports, I do fantasy baseball and I do fantasy football. I haven't had the extreme amount of time to actually, spend and sit down throughout the whole football off season to, kind of tinker around with all of the things. But I have taken, time, do a couple mocks a month since the Super Bowl of last year. And what I found out is, that these five wide receivers that are, quote unquote studs, they really offer upside to where, they're going to score if they blow up, they're going to score 30 plus. And, with a running back, when they blow up, it's 20 plus. So, just tinkering around with, systems, 10 teams, drafting from different spots within the last month or two, just kind of trying to get a feel for, all of the nuances of trying to do this. And the things that I found out is that, you can't really do it relatively high. You have to be somewhere within the 4 to 5 pick range down in 10 to 12 team leagues, and then the selection. I tried tinkering, adding Roddy White to the mix, seeing if Andre Johnson would work, seeing if other guys, like Randall Cobb would work in this system, and what I've come to find out is that I can only trust these five guys. And Demaryius Thomas, Calvin Johnson, who is the key of this process, Des Bryant, A.J. Green, and Brandon Marshall. Those guys, for me, going into this season, they offer so much upside when it comes to standard or PPR leagues. And even in PPR, this makes for a more brilliant strategy just due to the fact that, you have that point per reception involved. And the whole thing with the whole wide receiver thing is just, it's just kind of a counter. It's a counter to this whole running back strategy. And, I was just trying to develop something for people out there that, may not want to do running back early. And, what I found out is that you put the numbers side by side, you take those top 20 running backs and you take those top 5 wide receivers in the strategy, and their weeks are, similar. Out of the top 20 running backs, hardly over half of them had half of the games in a fantasy football season where they scored more than 13 fantasy points. And then you look over at the wide receiver side, it's the same way. There's about 4 running backs that scored more than 10 weeks of 13 or more points. And on the other side of football, there's only 8 weeks of production of that kind of caliber out of that top 5. But having 2 of the top 5 wide receivers as opposed to having 2 of the top 20 running backs. I don't know, just from a numbers logical standpoint, it just kind of made sense for me.
And that sort of plays into the question I was going to ask you next. Especially the people that subscribe to late round QB really, really buy into that and follow it are gonna, they're probably going to attack you and say it's a little crazy to not grab those running backs because of the point differential and everything like that. But when you actually look at the difference, like you said, between the top 5 wide receivers and the top 20 running backs, you're right. You're well on track. So is that the difference here? Is you need to compare top 5, 6 wide receivers to the top 20 running backs? You can't look top 20 to top 20 because that's where the bigger difference is.
Well, I think the bigger difference for me is that my whole logic and standpoint from a whole with this whole wide receiver strategy is that fantasy football really is a week-to-week sport. I think that it's often labeled and given, projections and stats are pumped out kind of if this is fantasy baseball. And this is not fantasy baseball, folks. This is a week-to-week thing. Players are going to have great weeks. Players are going to have crappy weeks. Obscure players in week 1 are going to score 3 touchdowns in one game, and you have no idea who that player is going to be. And it's going to be the same way week to week to week. So I just wanted to remove that whole idea of that, this is who you need for your whole season. And that's not the case. It's a week to week thing, and any given week, that first round running back that you're going to draft, just as well as my first round wide receiver that I'm going to draft, can have a crappy day. And that's just the reality of it that I wanted to put forth, is that really the basis of this whole strategy is that this is a week-to-week sport, and I think that people aren't thinking of it that way, and I think that that's where some people get themselves into trouble.
So when it comes to this strategy, you're taking wide receiver, later on in the draft when you're getting to the later rounds. Where are you valuing or targeting QBs? Is it pretty much the same as like a running back strategy at that point? Is it late round QB streaming? And what about tight ends? Does tight ends factor into the wide receiver method?
I'll go ahead and touch on the tight end part first. With the whole tight end situation, I looked into drafting Jimmy Graham as kind of a supplemental wide receiver too in this whole process. And for me, with that whole tight end position, I think that, it's just best to just wait on that position. Yeah, if you do like Jimmy Graham, because, really what I also like to preach is that, fantasy football is about personal taste. So if you really, really love Jimmy Graham, go ahead and use him as a part of this strategy. I don't think there's any problem with that, but for me, personal taste, I'm not going to be able to get him where I want to get him in the 3rd round. So that's why I've removed him from the strategy as a whole for me, but he can work. I think that that's a viable option in this whole process. Now, with the whole running back and the whole quarterback situation, the beauty of this process is that, also with personal taste, you can go quarterback stupid late with this process, because the whole thing is that after you take your 2 top studs wide receivers, you're building depth within the draft with the rest of your picks. So you probably, after you take those 2 top wide receivers, you're probably not going to draft another wide receiver unless you draft a 3rd wide receiver after that. But you're probably not going to draft another wide receiver for a really long time. You probably are going to take 4 or 5 running backs in a row, or you do 3 running backs in a row, then take a quarterback. You can have all sorts of kind of configurations when you do this process, just because of where people are valuing quarterbacks. It may not happen in your home leagues because obviously people still draft Aaron Rodgers in the 1st round or Drew Brees in the 1st round. But in certain leagues where, people are reading up on the fantasy football news and fantasy football, magazines and whatnot, this late round QB kind of idea is kind of taken over. And so I think that you can take advantage of that. And I think that if you want to draft Aaron Rodgers in the 4th round, so be it. That would be a great quarterback to have. But if you want to roll with Wacko Flacco Flame in the 13th round, you can do that. You can play matchups back and forth with these quarterbacks. It's just all about what you can what you can stomach, as a team, because, obviously the strategy isn't for everybody, but it's a strategy that, if people are willing to take a shot on, I can walk you through the season and we can, take this journey together in trying to figure out, what pieces of the puzzle is going to work. But yeah, I've had mocks where I've gotten Aaron Rodgers. I've had mocks where I've gotten Russell Wilson. I've had mocks where I've gotten, taking two quarterbacks and, like Matt Schaub and Phillip Rivers. So I think that, people fall in love with their players and, they absolutely love their players. And for me, a player is just a player that I want to perform at a high level on any given week.
All right, let's talk effectiveness in comparison to league size. Is this method more suited for 8-team, 10-team, or 12-team, or even 14 or 16-team leagues? And what league size is it least effective in?
From what I've mocked so far, because I have mocked from 10-team leagues to about 20-team leagues, and I think the bigger the league, the less effective it is, because the key is that you're trying to double down on the whole getting 2 top 5 wide receivers. Obviously you're going to be sitting in your draft room and you're going to be looking at who's selecting who, where you're getting to select the player. And when you sit down and you think about all that and you start looking at the draft board, you start looking at the players and stuff, you're like, okay, all right, I can get Calvin Johnson here. And then you look at the rest of the board, you look who's behind you, even if you know some of the people in your league, where they're going to go. Am I able to get 2 of the top 5 wide receivers? If the answer is yes, pull the trigger on this strategy, because I think that it works, and I think that it only works, though, for 10 to 12-team leagues. I think that, once I tried it with 14, it can work with 14, but you have to be really, really kind of like in that 7 to 8 to 9 range within the draft, and, you have no idea sometimes when you're going to be drafting, because some of them, randomize an hour before the draft. So I think that 10 to 12-team leagues, I think this can be effective from a draft slot position 4 on down, within those respective settings. And that's what I've seen work. Anything greater than that, I think that I wouldn't try it personally. I don't think that handcuffing yourself at the running back position is worth it in a 14-team or league or greater. So I just wouldn't condone anything.
So you're saying this is a method that you would recommend after pick number 5. You're saying between pick 5 and pick 10 or pick 12 if you're in a 12-team league.
Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, you know what? I think we're out of time. Thank you so much for coming on today, T. That was awesome. I always like hearing about new strategies because, sometimes we get stuck in a rut with that one strategy, and it's nice to hear something different, maybe get you thinking outside the box a little bit. Do you want to take a second to tell everyone where they can find you on Twitter, where they can find your work on the internet?
Oh, yeah, no problem, man. Thanks for having me, guys. I definitely appreciate it. Anytime you guys want to talk strategy, I'm here. You guys can follow me over on Twitter @Houday, spelled with a U, not an O. Check out Perusing the Perimeter over at Fantasy Trade 401 Radio Network. Check out my work over at FantasyTrade411.com. You can also check me out at FP911.com, DailyFantasySportsNetwork.com, and the Thuzz app. Thanks again for having me, guys.
Yeah, thanks so much, man. Have a good one.
Yeah, appreciate you coming on, T. Pleasure.
Football fans, check out the official t-shirt apparel shop for the Pro Football Central Radio Network. Check out bigfrog.com/Cincinnati. That's bigfrog.com/Cincinnati. You think it, we ink it. They have an awesome 24-hour turnaround time. You can also visit them at their fabulous store over at Anderson Town Center, 7426 Beachmont Avenue, Cincinnati, Ohio 45255. That's bigfrog.com/Cincinnati.
Football fans, looking to get healthy this year? Now is the time, and I have the perfect place for you. Save 10% at onit.com/football radio. Exclusive PFC radio listeners save 10% off their order. That's onit.com, ONNIT.com/football radio.
Cigar fans, check out fifthdowncigar.com and enter the coupon code PFC to get 10% off your order. Lots of nice high-end cigars. That's fifthdowncigar.com. Enter the code PFC for 10% off your order.
And welcome back to Fantasy Forecast Central Radio. We are joined right now by Alex Eason, co-owner of FantasyTradar.com. Alex, how's it going, man?
Good to have me. Good to be here.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on. So, this whole episode we've been talking draft strategy. As far as like a 12-team PPR, which for me, I consider that standard. I know it's not standard scoring, but for me, that is a standard league. That is the type of league I do the most. Do you have like a set strategy you go into that looking to pull off, and, walk us through it a little bit?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I view it as a pretty standard scoring system as well. It depends to me on the roster spots and the other details of the scoring as to exactly how I would go about a strategy. This year, I'm really leaning towards waiting on the tight end and the quarterback, unless, of course, there's 6-point passing touchdowns, and I try to get one of those elite guys. I feel that the quarterbacks are real deep this year with the running guys to be able to wait on them if it's not the 6-point passing touchdowns, in which case I like to get a strong running back and then just really load up on wide receivers. Try to get a couple guys rated in the top 20, a couple guys rated between 20 and 30, and then worry more about getting a little bit of a weaker running back as my second.
Okay. So, right before we started recording, we were talking a little about this, and, we were talking about some guys that, everybody right now, and we talked about this with T just a little bit ago, right now everyone's so focused on having to go running back first. If that happens and some huge PPR receivers have fallen, I've seen it, you've seen it, we've all seen it, Megatron making it right into the early second round, Dez falling to the mid-second round. If that's the case, even if you're not so set at running back and you've seen everybody take really good running backs already, do you sort of have to jump in and grab one of those wide receivers?
You mean running backs?
Yes, sorry, I said that completely backwards. I'm glad you're on the same page with me.
I do. If the receivers are falling and the running backs are going really heavy like they are in more non-PPR formats, the receivers are still going to be there when your next picks come. And if you're noticing this, you're probably picking pretty late in the draft, and you'll have a good shot at getting one of those top 2 or 3 receivers with your second pick and still being able to load up with a couple more top 20 or 25 guys the next time your 2 picks come around to you.
Now, in your opinion, like in your personal opinion, is there a quote-unquote best strategy that's clearly better than the rest, or is it more based on the owner's personality, the owner's mentality, and basically their draft position?
I think when you're playing with more experienced owners, it definitely depends more on your draft position and being able to adjust to what the rest of the league's doing. I mean, sometimes it's smart in those situations when everyone's going really running back heavy early to take maybe the top couple wide receivers or 2 of the top 3 or 4 receivers and weaken your running backs a little bit to give yourself an advantage there. I think that if you're not getting one of the top 4 or 5 PPR running backs, the difference between 5 through 15 is not as big as the difference between the top 3 or 4 receivers to the 10th or 12th receiver. So I think you're putting yourself in a good position by kind of going against the grain in a draft with more experienced people who think that they need those running backs for their team and are following that trend of the year.
Yeah, that's something I've noticed. We can tend to get too tied up in quote unquote expert leagues, playing with other writers, other analysts that spend way too much time dealing with this stuff. So is it one of those things where it's better to have a strategy when you're going into a league like that versus if you're playing in a more public league with more novice players? Do you sort of have to just kind of throw your strategy out the window at some point and just evaluate the board, evaluate how everyone's picking, and adjust accordingly?
Yeah, definitely. I think when you're playing with more novice players, the chances of them following the site's ranking that they're playing on there's a better chance of that. So you can kind of judge whether you need to reach for guys or not. Whereas when you're playing with more experienced players, you need to have more of a strategy, more of a target of the kind of team you want to build, and kind of throw ADP almost out the window after the first few rounds to get that team that you're looking for.
All right, Alex, let's kind of turn our attention towards trades. This is the first show that we'll actually talk trades. Fantasy trades can be touchy at times, and it can kind of cause rifts between certain, owners and leagues, because it seems like in the past, I've, personal, experiences that I've had, trade offers come into me that are just absolutely absurd. I'm basically given, an Adrian Peterson or a Kelvin Johnson type player. I'm giving up one of those types of players for basically a rack of yard tools from Sears in return. And I just want to know from you, how can a novice fantasy owner know that they're not getting ripped off in a trade, in a fantasy trade?
Well, I think that the most important thing to know going into a trade is that the first offer that someone sends you, especially if they're more experienced than you, is going to benefit them. So the first thing you should probably do when you get a trade offer like that is kind of take a step back and send a counter offer that's a little bit less in their favor, just to kind of feel out where they're at. Because I think, obviously, like you said, a more experienced owner will definitely try to take advantage of a novice owner by giving them a whole bunch of players that they claim will help them in the future for one good star that you can't replace anywhere else. So I think the most important thing is to kind of know the experience of the other owner, and know the fact that he would be trying. Generally, any trade offer you get from anybody, they're going to get the better end of the deal, and it's just a starting point for discussion. I think that's the purpose of a first trade, and I think people that jump on first trade offers are just getting overexcited.
Yeah, and I'm with you there. I think as far as any trade goes, especially for novice owners, the thing you really have to watch out for is someone not trying to take advantage of your lack of experience. There's a number of tools out there for it, but just ask your friends if anything. You never want to, like you said, you don't want to give up that one stud for 4 or 5 guys that could be great but might not be. And know that a first trade offer is always just a jumping off point, and you need to be able to negotiate there.
Definitely. Trading is a huge part to winning any league, but it's all about negotiation and knowing. I think a really important thing about trading is knowing who likes who. I mean, if you're in a draft and someone makes comments like, "Oh, you took my guy," keep that in mind for later. You know he's going to maybe pay a little bit more for that guy later, something like that.
I'm going to add something to this, because this is my personal opinion, and I don't know if you guys feel free to agree or disagree. When it comes to trading, I feel people get too emotionally tied into certain players, and I feel like that's a lot of the reason why people void trades, or they decline trades. They're like we were talking about before, they're looking for a lot to give up a little in returning getting a lot. So, and I think for novice owners, the number one thing you have to realize when it comes to trading is that in order to get something, you're going to have to give up something, and not to get emotionally attached to these guys. I mean, it's just your roster, and if look just look into the point system, and look to see, how many points per game this particular guy is, putting up each week. And if you think that guy can better your roster, who cares if you have an absolute man crush on Megatron? If you can get something in return, a solid wide receiver in return, and a running back that can bolster your running back core, pull the trade off. Who cares if you got man love for Megatron? I use myself as a example. I've had a man crush on Megatron since he was at Georgia Tech, and I've had the guy on probably 80% of all the fantasy teams I've been on since he's been in the league. But I've also traded him in numerous leagues, and the reason was I needed to bolster my roster from top to bottom. And I think novice owners need to realize that in order to get something, you're going to have to give up something. Feel free to disagree or agree with me.
Yeah, no, I'm going to go ahead and agree with that. I mean, you actually even see it happen in drafts far too often, that players get overdrafted because people like them, and then once they have them, they're untouchable just because of who they are. And I think that's crazy. I think that anybody should be an option to be traded if they can improve your team. I mean, there's no player that there's no trade can be made for, in my opinion. I think there's always a package that can be put together, even for the number one player.
I absolutely agree.
Yeah, I'm with you guys. I think you have to, especially for novice players, they have to remember you have to look at these players solely as numbers and commodities, if you will. You need to buy low, sell high, and get the best value to build the most, well-rounded team top to bottom. And you really need to take fandom, allegiances, and man crushes out of the equation. There's a number of players, and there's a number of Packer players that are some of my favorite players in the league, but I don't let that influence how I look at them from a fantasy perspective. They're nothing, but numbers to me. And it sounds cold, but that's how you have to look at it. And I think once you can get past that realization that you don't want to base this solely on the players that you like, you're going to be a lot more open to trades. You're going to make a lot better trades, and you're going to improve your team a lot better along the way.
Yeah, well said.
Awesome.
They are just numbers.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking a little draft strategy today with us, Alex. Do you want to take a second and tell our listeners where they can find you on Twitter and find your work on the internet?
Yeah, for sure. So we're at FantasyTradar.com, FantasyTradar. Same as Twitter, at FantasyTradar. My personal Twitter is at Beast Eason. And thanks for having me on, guys.
And welcome back to Fantasy Forecast Central Radio. We're joined now by Sal Stefanile, writer for SportJerks.net. Sal, how's it going, man?
It's going good out here. How you guys doing?
We're doing great. I don't know if you caught the spot we played there. It's unofficially Canada Day here on Fantasy Forecast Central Radio. You are our second guest from the Great White North, so we're breaking barriers today.
Well, I'm glad to be on there with my fellow Canadian brethren.
So, Sal, you were the 2QB guy. The one time I searched 2QB on Twitter, you were the first guy that came up. I spent a lot of time going through your stuff because I'm a big fan of 2QB leagues. I actually just stumbled upon them last year for the first time. Had a blast in like 3 of them. So as far as, drafting a 2QB team, is there any sort of strategy that is best to go into one of these drafts with? Or is it one of those things where you pretty much just have to sort of fly by the seat of your pants?
Well, for me, in terms of any type of fantasy football draft, be it 1QB, 2QB, I always try to stress flexibility and to know your league scoring rules and settings, which is, I think, something everybody lives by. But for me, the biggest thing is the league size. I mean, I've always been a 12-team 2QB guy, which always tends to find me having to draft at least 2 quarterbacks early, usually within my first two or three picks. But this offseason, because I've sort of gotten to talk to other two QBers out there, such as John Fortes over at FF Oasis, and he's more of like a 10-team two QB guy. So I've dabbled a little bit into that realm of the two QB world, and I just find it's a little bit easier to wait on quarterback on that type of draft. Like this year, I'm pretty flexible on who my QB1 is. I mean, everybody knows like there's at least 12 guys you'd be happy with as your QB1, and if I transfer that over into the realm of two QB leagues. In a 10-team 2 QB league, I'm looking usually at like the third round, where like the latter end stage of those guys, like Kaepernick, Wilson, and RG3. I don't know about you guys, but if any of those three are my quarterback one, I'd be pretty happy.
Yeah, I'm with you there. So we touched on league size a little bit here. As far as two QB leagues go, is there a sweet spot team number wise where it's just the best, like 10-team, 12-team? And are there any leagues? I mean, obviously, like with an 8-team league, it's just so easy. Everyone's going to get 2 to 3 really good quarterbacks. But if we bump it up to like 14, 16 teams, does the scarcity sort of make it not as competitive or not as fun at that point?
I don't know. I find any 2 QB league size would be fun. I mean, like you mentioned, like 8-team 2 QB leagues, you're going to have a stacked team no matter what. I didn't even know such a thing existed until people started asking me questions about 8-team 2 QB leagues. I'm like, if that's what you play in, that's cool. It's not for me. I've always been a 12-team 2 QB guy because I find like that's going to be pretty hard to stack your team quarterback wise. Because I mean, yeah, sure, quarterback position is pretty deep this year. But if you're starting 24 quarterbacks every week, when you're getting around to like 25, 26 QB on that list, it's kind of pushing things a bit. So I find that makes it fun and competitive because you're trying to make sure that you get your quarterback combination right, and that you're not winding up with like say Mark Sanchez as your quarterback 2 or something like that.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask you. It's safe to say there's 12 quarterbacks out there that anyone would take as a QB1, would be happy with, right?
Yeah, no, I think so too. I've also added Eli Manning and Ben Roethlisberger to my QB1 tier, but that's just me personally.
Okay, so you're saying like around 14-ish
Yeah,
QB1?
yeah.
Okay, so
for me personally.
Okay, and I can get behind that. That makes sense to me. But as far as then the QB2 options, is it safe to say that there really isn't 12 more viable QB2 options? Like it gets pretty scarce there towards the end?
Yeah, you're starting to dig a little bit deep into that too. Except now lately it's starting to get just a little bit deeper with like the situations we've been seeing, the type of quarterbacks that have been performing in the preseason. I mean, like, Michael Vick he's like the ultimate boomer bust QB2. I don't think I'm ready to draft him as my QB2, but he's the type of guy, if you can wait to get him as your QB2, he could be a QB1, or he could even be the top fantasy quarterback. You never know.
Okay, Sal, you mentioned early on that you like to go after QBs early, pretty much right away from what I gathered anyway. Is getting 2 QBs in a league like this better than having 2 running backs?
If you're in a like say for example 12-team 2 quarterback league, I mean, if you're getting 2 quarterbacks early, most of the other teams are going to be drafting quarterbacks early too, so that's going to push down the running backs, which will allow you to most likely get at least one of the top running back options. It's almost kind of like an unspoken rule in some 2 quarterback drafts where like everybody will get a quarterback in the first round, and then like in the second round it's like kind of pick and choose from the running backs and the receivers, and then like in the third round the quarterbacks start going again. So it's almost kind of like the first 2 rounds are like just dedicated to the quarterback position, like it's like a mini draft of sorts.
So you're saying Adrian Peterson, Arian Foster, et cetera, they fall to the second round?
Sometimes they do. I mean, it's all going to depend on the 2 quarterback league you're in, the scoring settings. Like if you're in a 4-point passing touchdown league, then no, the quarterbacks aren't all going to go right away at the beginning. So like a guy like Peterson will go, a guy like this year like Martin Charles. You will have teams here and there that'll take a running back in the first. But if you're like in a super heavy 2 quarterback league where passing touchdowns are worth 6 points and you don't get your quarterback one early, you're going to be missing out.
And that's what I wanted to ask you. If say you have like the first or the second overall pick, it's obviously a very tough decision. Do you go QB and start the run of QBs, or do you wait hoping that it's going to be running back centric? Like how do you weigh that decision, and which way would you lean?
Honestly, that's one of the most difficult decisions in two quarterback leagues, and it's something like I've had so many people ask me about it. And again, I hate to harp on the same point over and over, but league size does play a difference. So if it's a 10-team two quarterback league, and I got the first pick, I'm going to take the risk that at least one of the top quarterbacks is going to follow me in the second, third round. So I'm going to go a top running back. But if it's a 12-team two quarterback league, I mean, those extra 4 draft slots is going to play a huge difference. And if I miss out on a quarterback, like say if I don't go Breeze or Rodgers first overall, I'm just afraid of the quarterback depth just being depleted by the time my second round pick is on the board.
All right. Last year, Sal, we saw some rookie QBs become major fantasy players. RG3, Andrew Luck, Russell Wilson. Are we going to see that this year? And what value do rookie QBs have this year in a 2 QB system?
Yeah, well, I've done a couple of pieces about the rookie quarterbacks on Sports Jerks, and I mean, when you're looking at it from a one quarterback point of view, you're not really considering the rookie quarterbacks too much because I mean, there's just so many other quarterbacks you're going to take before them. And then this year, we really only have 2 options in terms of rookie quarterbacks with EJ Manuel and Geno Smith. And it seems like the Jets are still going to stick with Mark Sanchez for now. So we can't go out and draft Geno quite yet, but he could be a sneaky QB3, QB4 type if you're willing to wait for the moment the Jets decide to come to their senses at the quarterback position. But EJ Manuel's been getting a lot of love in the fantasy community lately with like good reason. I know he's being drafted late. He's got the first round pedigree. I mean, he's not completely known as a dual threat quarterback, but he does offer that rushing capability. And if we've seen in fantasy football, if you get a rushing quarterback, especially in leagues where passing touchdowns are worth 4 points, as Fantasy Douche said it on Twitter, it's almost like a cheat code where you have a rushing quarterback. But the main appeal with like the rookie quarterbacks is they usually get drafted late, and the 2 quarterback ADP that we have is pretty limited in its scope, so it doesn't tell a full picture. But EJ Manuel's being drafted in like the QB3 tier, and he could easily be a QB2 option. So that's where the value comes in with the fantasy quarterbacks of the rookie variety. And if I'm not sure if you guys read the chart on Sports Jerks, but 14 quarterbacks have finished as a QB2 like the past decade, and they've all outperformed their ADP.
Oh wow, I actually did not know that. But a follow-up question here about Manuel then. I agree with you completely, skill set wise, talent wise, definitely a QB2 option. But as a rookie, with someone like CJ Spiller on the roster, does it worry you that they may lean on Spiller very heavily because of EJ Manuel's rookie status, and just sort of ease him into things, and we won't really see good fantasy production from him till week 11, 12 when they finally let him turn it loose, kind of like we did with Russell Wilson last year?
Yeah, no, I get that. I mean, we had the same concerns with Russell Wilson last year and RG3 last year, and we get that same type of concern with EJ Manuel this year. But no, it's not like we're saying EJ Manuel is going to be a QB1 or that we're even drafting him as a QB2. It's all about the value you can get. And when you're drafted in a 2 quarterback fantasy football league, like it's going to be tough to find a quarterback late because everybody has the same mentality. It's like get a quarterback, get a quarterback, get a quarterback. And when you're looking at like the QB3 tier, there's really not that many great options to look at. So you see a guy like EJ Manuel who could potentially be a QB2, and you're like, okay, I can get a guy, put him on my bench, hopefully he performs at a quarterback 2, but I'm drafting him at a quarterback 3 price.
So
and I
you're on. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to jump in.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I've been a big fan of the Bills' offense this year and that fast-paced tempo, and I think it's Kean Fahey. He now writes for Football Guys. He used to have a website called Pre-Snap Reads, who really got me started on the Buffalo Bills offense. And even with EJ Manuel or Kevin Kolb, whichever one was going to be there, just based on what he was writing about that offense, it just seemed either one of those 2 quarterbacks would have good fantasy value this year because of the offense they're in and the weapons they're surrounded with.
So let's jump to the other rookie quarterback that you mentioned briefly, Geno Smith.
Yeah.
Is Geno draft worthy in a 2 QB system? Personally he's not, I don't think he's draftable in standard formats, but in a 2 QB system I guess that could be a possibility. Do you believe that? I mean, even with Mark Sanchez, you know, looks like he's going to start out the season as the starter. I mean, even Geno Smith is a little bit injured right now. So are people taking a chance on him really late and just kind of stashing him on the bench?
Yeah, well, the thing is, like, in the crazy world of 2 quarterback fantasy football leagues, every quarterback, no matter how little, has value. Like, even a Christian Ponder or Geno Smith, like, everybody who either is a starter, who you think could be a starter, who could replace a starter, is going to get drafted because there's not going to be that many options on the waiver wire. I mean, every year we get lucky. They're like a Tim Tebow is there on the waiver wire or Colin Kaepernick. But if you're playing in a 2 quarterback league that knows its league settings, knows its fellow league mates, and knows that quarterbacks are going to get taken, like those guys are going to be drafted. They're going to be stashed on the bench, especially if you have a deep bench. So, like, if Geno Smith's the type of guy this year, if you have the room on your bench and you think he's going to start, you're going to draft him as your QB3, probably QB4, in the hopes that he plays this year, also in the hopes that, you don't miss out on getting him on the waivers.
Awesome. Sorry, I think that's all we have for today, Sal. Thank you so much for coming on. You pretty much killed it with the 2QB information. Do you want to take a second to tell everyone where they can find you on Twitter and your work on the internet?
Yeah, for sure. Right now I'm writing about 2QB leagues on sportsjerks.net. I started a blog back in the day, earlier this offseason, called 2QB or not 2QB.com. We got some content on there.
I like that.
Yeah. On Twitter, you can find me at 2QBFFB. If you guys have any questions, I'm always willing to help out. I mean, like, I just like talking about 2 quarterback fantasy football leagues, which is the whole reason I got into it, because there just wasn't much content being put out on a consistent basis. And if you have a question that's pretty in-depth that needs more than 140 characters to be answered, we've got a 2QB open thread Q&A going on sportsjerks.net, so feel free to hit us up with your questions. And yeah, just before I go, I mean, like, I know it's hard to find 2QB content out there, but there are some other great writers on Twitter that you can hit up too for questions. We got, I mentioned John Fortes earlier on FF Oasis. He's JB4TES. Then we got Paul Grossman, PGROSSMAN1. And then there's another website out there called 2QBs.com, run by a couple guys named Josh Berger and Josh Lakes. I'm always interacting with these guys on Twitter, so if you see 2QB talk, just feel free to hit up any one of us.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Sal, and I'm sure we'll have you on again in the future.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah. And welcome back to Fantasy Forecast Central Radio. We're going to discuss some 8-team league strategy here for you now. We're going to discuss how they differ from 10-team, 12 teams, and even 16-team leagues, and what kind of strategy fits with an 8-team league. First off, we're going to discuss the running back method. Now, personally, in an 8-team league, everybody knows that there's, most teams by the end of the draft all look pretty stacked, unless you're, a complete novice and you're not sure what you're doing in the draft. But what kind of strategy works best in an 8-team league, even though all teams are stacked? Nick, I gotta ask you, I'm kind of throw one I kind of would throw all strategies out the window and just kind of roll with best player available. That's kind of I think what I would do in the first couple in the rounds, because I still think I can get solid value in every position later on. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm with you. It's one of those things with like an 8-team league where I've just mocked them for so long as being so easy. I've never done one. Like, I'll come right out and say that until this year I had never done one. But my friend Ethan Hammerman, who I'm sure everyone follows on Twitter, great dude. He works for Fanium, this app that just came out a couple weeks ago. I don't know if you've tried it, buddy. You should. It's actually pretty fun. But it's a 8-team format league. With some pretty cool scoring rules. You get 2 QBs, 2 running backs, 4 wide receivers, 2 tight ends, PPR. So it's actually interesting enough that I jumped into it and was like, okay, for an 8-team league, this could be a lot of fun. And I, went in there with my normal running back strategy, and I realized within 30 seconds that I just needed to pretty much just completely throw everything out the window and go best player available. But I think the most important thing with an 18 league so far that I have picked out is that you need to know your rankings to a T and not let the website that you're using or other people's influence you. You know, if you have Shane Vereen listed, as a third round pick, but this site and everyone in there doesn't value him or even notice him until like the 5th round, you can hang back on him because you're going to get better value then, and you can get other players. But it's one of those things where you can literally take a QB, a running back, a wide receiver. I mean, honestly, you could take a tight end first. There's enough players available that I feel like you'll be able to fill out a competitive roster. And like you said, you don't know what you're doing and you're just drafting total duds. Player in an 18 league, players like, Chris Ivory, Bilo Powell, Sean Green, Ben Jarvis Green Ellis, even players like that, Andre Brown, Bryce Brown, the list goes on and on. Those backup running backs that we normally have a lot of value for in 12-team leagues are going to be perennial bench sitters in 18 leagues, right?
Right. So you mentioned you wouldn't have any problem drafting a quarterback in the first round, and I don't think in an 18 league I would either. Are there any quarterbacks outside of Drew Brees, Aaron Rodgers, and Peyton Manning that you would draft in an 18 league in first round?
To be honest,
are those the three?
No, honestly, Rodgers is the only one I would, just because I know there's so much value later. I'll just stack up on running backs and wide receivers. Because, in a 2-team league, you can get any of the runners, Wilson, Kaepernick, RG3, anywhere from like the 3rd to 7th round. And then there's still people like Tony Romo, Andy Dalton, Joe Flacco, Jay Cutler, still available even after that, Eli Manning, even later. So it's sometimes, like I said, you have to play the draft. But it's one of those things where Rodgers would be the only quarterback I would take in the first round. That shows you just how much I hate taking quarterbacks in the first round.
Right. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And you also mentioned tight end. I'm assuming we're both on the same page. You were thinking Jimmy Graham.
Yeah, Jimmy Graham. If Gronk was healthy, if Gronk was starting the season on the active roster, one of those two, I could justify taking with like the 6th, 7th, or 8th pick, especially when you're right there at the turn. You can grab a quarterback, running back, wide receiver next. Is it the smartest strategy? Probably not. You're wasting a lot of value doing that. But I'm just saying, with an 18 league, I think it could work.
Yeah. So pretty much we're in agreement then that it going best player available in the first couple of rounds, grabbing that most elite, I guess you would want to call it the most elite player at that, at that draft position. We haven't really touched on the wide receivers that much. Megatron would be an obvious choice in an 8-team league in the first round. Is there anybody outside of Calvin Johnson that you would consider probably being at the end of the first round, draft position wise?
Yeah, in a couple of those Fanium leagues, I've seen Megatron go first overall.
What?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you get to start 4 wide receiver and it's PPR. And like I said, it's only 8 team. You can really build out from there. But
Sure.
I would probably take Megatron, Dez, and Brandon Marshall. Probably the 3 I'd be okay taking in the first. Just because knowing if all 3 of them are available, probably the running backs that I value the most are probably gone, and then I'm right at the turn and can get a Chris Johnson, an Alfred Morris, Lamar Miller, Reggie Bush, Darren Sproles, anything like that. So there's a lot of there's just so much value. It's just insane, and I think like with any league, you obviously have to pay very close attention to your rules. My only interaction with 18 leagues have been Fanium, so everything I say is solely based on a PPR, 2 tight end, 2 QB starting system.
Okay. Well, that's about all we have for 8-team league strategies today. We're going to go to break, and then when we come back...
Cigar fans, check out fifthdowncigar.com and enter the coupon code PFC to get 10% off your order. Lots of nice high-end cigars. That's fifthdowncigar.com. Enter the code PFC for 10% off your order.
And welcome back to Fantasy Forecast Central Radio. Nick, we had a great show today, man. We had some fantastic guests.
Yeah, you know what? We really did. I want a big thanks to T for coming on and talking wide receiver strategy. That's sort of outside the box, especially for me. So it was kind of cool to get some insight on. Thanks to Alex Eason for coming by, talking some trade strategy. And thank you to Sal for stopping by and talking 2QB. I'm obsessed with 2 QB leagues. So that was a lot of fun to talk about. Thanks to everybody for listening, and we will catch you next Tuesday.
This has been a presentation of the Pro Football Central Network. For news, blogs, highlights, and more, log on to ProFootballCentral.com.